I had a conversation with my Christian mother. I was considering running for Congress, and I told my mom, and I said, if I run for Congress, would you vote for me? She goes, no, you'd make it illegal to be Christian. I was like, Mom, you know me better than that. She's like, I know. And she laughs and she goes, but still, I don't think I could bring myself to vote for an atheist.
For those willing to listen, learn, and have eyes to see and ears to hear, this is the Nonpartisan Evangelical Podcast.
I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
Challenging the mindset of right-wing Christianity and encouraging people to have their minds renewed and hearts transformed.
What knucklehead, mush for brains evangelical leaders are trying to overthrow Trump? It's a special kind of dumb, and calling yourself a Christian.
Let's have better conversations about the life modeled in the Bible so we can truly tell the world God is not mad at you. This is the Nonpartisan Evangelical Podcast at npepodcast.com.
Welcome to the show, everybody. Paul Swearingen here, otherwise known as Pastor Paul, the TikTok pastor. And this is the Nonpartisan Evangelical Podcast, where we try to reclaim some part of evangelicalism from this kind of right-wing craziness. And our motto is, God is not a Republican. And so part of that process is getting people in proximity with others that they may not get to have community with or communication with. And so I've got a couple of great guests toward that today. Very scary characters, humanist, atheist, all of the things that make us go screaming in the night in our bedrooms. From the David C. Smalley podcast, a podcast that I had the honor to be on a couple of weeks ago. And they're nice guys, I promise. David C. Smalley is with us and Michael Regilio. Hey guys, how's it going?
Very good, thank you.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having us. I want to tell you, we recorded it. Technically, it's not out yet because I'm saving you because it was such a good episode. I'm saving that for when we launch on our brand new network, which is something Michael connected us with on Starburns. I'm saving that episode. So I usually just release it like the same day, like right when we're done recording, it goes out. But that show's probably going to be my first episode on the new network any day now.
Wow, I'm honored. Well, if it doesn't come out in a month or so, I'll figure I hit the dustbin. So tell us about the David C. Smalley podcast. As I look through the titles, it's like David versus Christian, David versus this. What is the mission of the podcast? And am I right? You are a humanist? Is that a good description for where you guys are coming from?
Yeah. I think we're both humanists. I'm a little bit better of a humanist than Michael, and that's okay. That's okay. I'm a nicer person. I love people more. He puts his love into animals and became a vegan. I'll eat bacon. So he's nicer toward animals. We all have our favorites. But for the most part, yeah, we're both comedians. But I started the show 11 years ago. It originally started as like a blog. It was called Dogma Debate. And I would post basically a blog that would say, here's an issue, because I was a Christian sort of coming out of my faith. And I would say, here's an issue I have with the Bible. Was Jesus the Son of God, or is he God incarnate? And then a whole discussion would start and the forum would sort of break apart and people would be talking. And I noticed that when people would get really nasty with each other, an atheist would get really nasty with a Christian or vice versa, rather than deleting the comment and banning the person, which was really popular in the early 2000s, I basically just would comment on the person as the owner of the blog. And I would say, do you think that this is the right way to get the person to see your point? And I would leave the comment there. And inevitably, almost unanimously, the comments would be, I'm sorry, you're right. I shouldn't have responded that way. I was just upset because I was abused by religion, or my dad's an atheist and left my mom and we go to church every day. And someone's got, we all come with so much baggage, and I'm guilty of it as well. We all are. We lash out at people, but it's important to reflect why we lashed out and if that's going to be productive moving forward. And so the blog got really popular, and it was hard to keep up with responding. So I started recording conversations because I could talk in real time. And so the podcast was originally called Dogma Debate, and I was just the host, David C. Smalley. And then over time, we eventually changed the name of the podcast. I had a lot of recurring co-hosts coming in and out. A lot of times when I talk with believers, it's one-on-one. And then for your conversation, I had Michael here, mostly because I think it was on a Sunday. And Michael comes over for the Sunday episodes that we do mostly comedy and politics. And then I record a Thursday episode where it's just me one-on-one with a Christian or someone who claims to be a psychic or someone who claims to be into crystal healing. And I think Michael brought me one person back when you were on another show. He brought me someone who claimed to be able to feel energy in crystals. So we blindfolded her and handed her rocks and paper clips and mixed crystals in. And we test Ouija boards and all kinds of stuff just to see what's going on. So it sort of moved into this idea of skepticism, polite disagreements about politics, but we also try to keep it funny. And a lot of the time it's hard to be funny and polite, right? Because you want to roast somebody and have someone laugh. You don't want to be super respectful, but Michael's been a great addition to the podcast. I love his knowledge, his attitude's very similar, and his deep dive of historical politics is way greater than mine. So it's great to have him as a resource on the show.
How did the crystal lady do, Michael?
Amazingly, you would think that, so we blindfolded her and we were giving her like a rock from David's front yard versus a crystal purchased in a crystal shop, and you'd think that she would be best case scenario 50-50 blind chance. She was actually like 80-20 guessing the rocks were crystals and the crystals are rocks. She did really, really poorly.
Yeah. And then I was so inspired by that episode. I did another one where we did it again, and she was wrong about 70% of the time. So it's really weird. The both times we've tested it, it's been incredible. I also did one where I did a Ouija board and I turned the board with them blindfolded, and we have some video of that. Yeah. So we're all about testing any claims of the metaphysical, including Christianity. If people claim to have, relationships with God, we want to talk about that. We want to know where they're coming from, but we also want to have a good time doing it and stay respectful.
Right.
So.
And I just had a thought that I hadn't had before. Maybe they've got it exactly backwards. Maybe rocks have energy and power and crystals don't. And that's why both energy people were guessing the rocks were crystals.
Wow, that's brilliant.
Yeah. Maybe. And I think the interesting thing, and it certainly was the case when I was with you guys, that you are honoring and respectful of people's beliefs. And so I think that gives some good space for some conversation. And that's why I really wanted to have you on. So, because atheist, humanist, all of that stuff is pretty scary to particularly our evangelical Christians, and secular humanists are going to take over the world. I heard this all the time when I was a kid. But is your background spiritual, religious? Where do you come at this from?
I'm sorry, tell me again. My dad was in Opus Dei. That's how Catholic we were. And if your viewers don't remember Opus Dei, they're kind of best known for the Da Vinci Code. The bad guy was in Opus Dei, but they are a branch of Catholicism that is so strict that only men are allowed to join, and they still do mass in Latin. They Vatican II, too progressive for them. They messed it up when they switched over to English.
Are those the guys that chant like Mecca Lecca Hi, Mecca Honey Ho?
That's
the other people have to say honey. Oh, whatever. I've lost track over time.
Yeah.
And so is the premise, and David, I heard your conversation about President Biden's inauguration and the religious themes around that, and certainly from the conversation, you see that as. Do you see it as a threat? Is there a danger in it, or is it just you just would prefer people who aren't religious not to have to be exposed to those types of occurrences?
That is such a good question, and I think if the vast majority of your viewers and or listeners are evangelical, this is super important for them to know. I would say the vast majority of atheists would march with you if some government official were attempt to outlaw Christianity. And that's interesting for people to wrap their heads around. A lot of times what we're really saying is you're not representative of all the people. We want all the people represented. And so if you get up before a Senate hearing and say a prayer to God, or specifically Jesus Christ, or say in Jesus' name, amen, just pause for a moment and think about the Hindus, think about the Jews, think about the Native Americans, the Cherokee, the people who don't worship your specific version of Christianity. Think about the atheists and the non-believers, all the people that you're alienating in that point. It's a threat in the sense that we feel like we don't matter, or that if you are praying to God for your foreign policy, I have to go, which God, which version of the Bible are you ascribing to? Which God is talking to you? Is it the God who said, love your neighbor as yourself and turn the other cheek? Or is it the God of fundamentalist Christianity that's thriving in the Republican Party? That's pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Are we doing the if you're poor, it's your own damn fault type God? Like, which God are you talking to? That's the concern. It's threatening in that way. And I care what you believe, because we share a freeway, right? And if you let Jesus take the wheel, we're both screwed. So I do care what you believe, and it can become threatening, but the vast majority of like the lawsuits and the complaints that we have come from us raising our hand and going, have you considered the Hindus? Have you considered the Muslims? Have you considered the Jews? Have you considered the atheists? Don't act like this is the government of Jesus Christ. This is a secular government, and you're allowed to have your own individual political views and religious views, but to start legislating based on your interpretation of the Bible, now we have an issue, because now you're forcing your version of Christianity on me. And the truth is, I don't think Christians should want that either, because then it just comes down to the interpretation of that politician. And there are plenty of Christians who disagree on interpretations of the Bible. So, it's threatening because we share a government, and that government shouldn't take sides.
Right. We often say that it's, as well as it's freedom of religion, it's also freedom from religion. And as David said, he said, did you consider the Hindu? Did you consider the Native American? And the best way to consider everybody is just leave religion out of politics altogether. And of course, your political views can be informed by religion, but don't expect to say, we're going to pass this law or this legislation because the Bible says so, and expect us to go, that's a plenty good reason. That's not a plenty good reason for us.
Exactly. So you're not buying the America is a Christian nation and anybody of any other religion is welcome, but they just have to understand that those, we're based on Christian values and Christian traditions.
Look at the Treaty of Tripoli.
That's exactly where I was going with that. The Treaty of Tripoli, it was stated on the Senate floor that the United States government is in no way founded upon the Christian religion. And that was one of the few things that was unanimously agreed upon in the Senate. When do you know when that was?
It was 1790s. It was John, actually, I think it was early 1800s. It was John Adams was still the president of the United States. And the senators, for the most part, were all founding fathers. So if America was founded as a Christian nation, they didn't know it. The opening to the treaty says America was in no way founded as a Christian nation.
Yeah. And they all agreed. They all passed it.
So that passed unanimously. And could you imagine that even passing in 2021? It wouldn't even get to the floor.
No.
What do you think they did? They said you're endowed by your creator with certain inalienable rights.
Right. Yeah. And that's coming off of John Locke, obviously. And life, liberty, and property was what Locke believed. And Thomas Jefferson just sort of used that as a blueprint when he said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But yeah, when they talk about inalienable rights, they're talking about rights that it was a humanist position, and they were speaking in the vernacular of the time when they said of your creator. And you want to talk about Jefferson. Obviously, he wrote the Jefferson Bible, which he took all the miracles and all the supernatural out of it. And Benjamin Franklin said, lighthouses are more important than churches. So, I mean, when they use terms like the creator, they were using just the parlance of their day.
And keep in mind, this was pre-Darwin. So we didn't have any Darwinian evolution concepts. We didn't have any concepts of the origins of species. That didn't exist yet. And a lot of those folks definitely, that mindset of this deistic creator God that just started things and walked away, started to fade away with Darwinism. So,
yeah, and I think where, to your point, where it becomes dangerous, and I think we're seeing some of that in our culture now, is there's this feel of like we want to be this dominant culture, we being the Christian culture in America. And if we lose that, then we lose everything. And so Ilhan Omar cannot be somebody in power in the United States. And we can justify not having Muslims have political positions of political influence and such. So I can see where it does become a danger at that point when maintaining majority control becomes important to Christians and thus then becomes very damaging to culture. And I think we're seeing a lot of that today.
I think maybe they're so afraid because they're afraid that if we gain power, we will do what they have been doing, which is attempt to force everybody. Like, I had a conversation with my Christian mother. I was considering running for Congress, and I told my mom, and I said, if I run for Congress, would you vote for me? She goes, no, you'd make it illegal to be Christian. I was like, Mom, you know me better than that. She's like, I know. And she laughs, and she goes, but still, I don't think I could bring myself to vote for an atheist. I'm like, you know that I'm a decent person. She's like, I know. I don't know. I'll just cross that bridge when I come to it. I'm like, I don't even live in your state. So I was messing with you anyway, but still, it's important. If I were to run for president, would you vote? You know, it's this idea that you think that we're going to outlaw your beliefs. And that's why I said most atheists would march with you and fight with you if someone did try to outlaw your beliefs. We don't want to outlaw your belief. We don't want to make it illegal to read the Bible. We don't want to stop you from being a Christian. What we want to stop is you getting preferential treatment in the law. And I can give you a quick example if it's okay.
Sure, go.
How this happens. So and I've never met a Christian. Well, that's not fair. Let me just state this and then I'll see how you feel about it. So daycares, for example. If Michael and I started our own daycare facility and we hired a bunch of people to run it, we would have to, if we have 35 children there's a certain number of adults that have to be there, along with CPR certification on CPR, dealing with infants, dealing with young children, because it's all a little bit different. There has to be a certain number of first aid kits and bandages, right? And if the government comes in and checks our statistics and we have one person with 12 kids and it's supposed to be one person for every 10 kids, we get written up, we get fined and potentially shut down because it's a danger to the children, right? So it's regulated and it should be regulated. So in turn, the daycares then will charge you even if your kid doesn't show up because they say, hey, you're signed up, you're on the roster. I have to have one person for every so many children. But you can go to church and drop your kid off at the church daycare where the pastor's 16-year-old daughter is watching 43 kids with no certifications, with no education whatsoever past 10th grade. And it's perfectly fine. That's a danger to the children. She's watching infants. They're playing with Legos. We're playing with small toys that are choking hazards. She has no experience. She has never had a child. She's never had any sort of formal education, and that's fine. And if the government says, hey, you can't have a 16-year-old in charge of 40-something kids, the Christians cry, you're infringing upon my religious liberties, right?
Right.
That's a problem. So if you're allowing it as childcare, you're getting a pass to fly under the radar to put children in danger based on your religious privilege. When if Michael and I were to start a secular daycare, we have to go by all these other certifications that cost us a lot of money. So what we're saying is, if you're going to have a daycare inside of a church, you should have to go by the same regulations that everybody else does because it's about safety. These rules are written in blood, and you don't get to put children in danger because you say you believe in a God. That's what the atheist political movement is about. It's about fairness. It's about treating everyone exactly the same, not allowing preferential treatment based on religious beliefs.
So you're not trying to, what about like traditions like nativity scenes or crosses on public property that have been there for a long, long time? We see this now even in San Francisco where they're trying to take the name Abraham Lincoln off of schools. And that's been a big talk up here in central Northern California this year. What's that?
We haven't heard about that.
Oh, you didn't hear about that? Oh, it's a big thing up in San Francisco. They're going to change the names of something like 44 schools, and that includes Abraham Lincoln's name is going to be taken off of school.
I wonder what the reason for wanting Lincoln's name off.
Lincoln was not very nice to the natives.
Yeah, that Lincoln wanted to send the freed slaves back to Africa. Apparently, he wasn't.
Nigeria. They did, in fact.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And so now so anyway. I mean, the point is, and some religious person might say, but this has been our tradition for a long time. We put our hand on the Bible. Do you want to take these traditions out? And is it going too far on the atheist side now?
Well, I mean, the tradition argument is, in my opinion, a particularly weak one, because there's plenty of traditions that we'll all agree needed to go away. And I mean, tradition is just not, I mean, you could say that, women being property was a tradition, and for a long time,
Wait, that's over? We can't do that anymore?
Sorry, Dave.
There goes my dating life.
I don't find tradition to be a very good reason. It's like, well, obviously we're evolving as a society, and we're getting better all the time. So looking back and saying, well, that's the way they used to do it, that's not the best argument I've ever heard. But as far as nativity scenes, again, think of the other religions. I mean, do I have a personal problem with it? But what is the message to the Jewish person who also lives in that town, who also pays taxes, and that's also their town square or their government building that you're putting that nativity scene in front of? You're saying, we prefer this religion to your religion. I mean, I grew up in the Christian religion, and I very much like Christmas. It's all good memories for me, not a bad one in the bunch. I like nativity scenes. They remind me of good times and good tidings. But, in that particular case, it's the message you're sending.
When I said we share a government and that government doesn't get to choose sides, that's exactly what that is. When the 10 Commandments are in the front of City Hall, you've chosen one God. You've chosen the God of the Bible. And that alienates a lot of people who pay taxes into that building to make that building possible. Even if that specific nativity scene or that specific 10 Commandment monument was donated or paid for by an individual donor, it's not only not representative of most people, it's divisive in nature, because you're making people feel like they are second-class citizens. Imagine if the roles were reversed. Imagine if there is some specific Muslim monument that was donated to a city hall and the mayor happened to be Muslim and allowed it to happen. Would you really be okay with walking up to that city hall every single time with these Muslim commandments up there, giving praise to Muhammad and Allah? That would rub a lot of people the wrong way. And so we're not saying don't believe in it, right? Have your belief. What we're saying is that is shared property paid for by everyone. Don't take sides. And so we will fight you every step of the way to have nothing there. Because if we're going to have every religion represented, get ready for it's going to look like a cemetery in front of the city hall. There's going to be 50 different monuments with all these headstones. Like, why are we turning this into a religious museum? This is where city business should take place, not where we should choose preferential religious beliefs.
Yeah, there was a deal in Texas a few years ago where one of the schools where the football players were running through a banner with a Bible verse on it at a public school, and the court said they couldn't do it, and everybody went nuts. And that was my question. Like, well, what if they wanted to put a verse from the Quran up? What if they wanted to put a verse from the Mormon Bible? You guys would, excuse my language, lose your shit, And
the argument often is, but this is a Christian nation. No. Yeah. It didn't start gaining that until the rise of the religious right in the 70s. We were not a Christian nation. And the printing on the money was in the 50s under Eisenhower. It was because we were trying to be the good Christian nation as opposed to the communist Russian or the communist Soviet Union. It was all optics. This was all very recent, including adding under God to the Pledge of Allegiance. I was probably in my late 20s before I realized that was not part of the original writing. It was added in the 50s when Eisenhower was trying to show that we were this good Christian nation. It was all for optics. We were not a Christian nation at all. And going back to the Treaty of Tripoli, we can show that. This is a very recent development that American exceptionalism has added to it, this idea of God. It was not there for the most part. It was a generic deistic creator, but it has morphed into specifically like fundamentalist Christianity in a very specific type, to the point where you have a debate in Georgia where you have this white woman who has no credentials as far as I know. She's a multi-billionaire. As far as I knew, she married into money. I don't think she even did much. I could be overstepping there, but I don't think she did anything to earn it. And here she is running against Raphael Warnock, who's a pastor, a reverend in Georgia. And they're at the debate, and she says to him that he preaches baby murder from the pulpit and starts arguing with him that he is a baby murderer because he is in favor of Planned Parenthoods staying in low-income areas so women can have access to healthcare. I mean, and they're both claim to be Christian, and yet they're battling each other. That's the whole point. It's like, guys, this was not supposed to be. We were not supposed to be intertwining our religious beliefs with our federal laws or with our government.
Right. And that is very interesting that, when you talk about the Christians feeling like atheists are trying to take over, but the Christians that believe those things also don't like Joe Biden, one of the most religious presidents we've had in a long time. So it's sort of, I think the GOP thinks they own God, and you folk are the ones who have to fight back against that. I mean, is it Christian or is it Republican? Because it seems to be Republican Christians are the ones that feel put on.
Yeah, the religious right moral majority really was born out of hatred for Jimmy Carter, who was probably the most evangelical Christian president we've ever had, or at least in my lifetime. So,
yeah,
it is ironic, and from a Christian standpoint, it just always seems to me that the politicians who most want to put in God we trust on the wall. This was a big thing that happened in Fresno a few years ago. We put in God we trust because on the wall of the city council chambers, because this one city council member was really pushing it. And it just always seems like it's the biggest assholes in the building that are wanting to put in God we trust or the 10 Commandments on the wall. So,
and it's a huge slippery slope. And I want people to know, because a lot of Christians will be like, why do you guys care? So what? It's a small town in Everman, Texas, or Dakota, Washington. Like, who cares? Let them do what they want. The city voted on it. It's their city. It's because it sets legal precedent. Whenever you get ready to battle a case, you look at what other cases decided. And if you start having a history of people putting in God we trust in courtrooms, which is happening, by the way, and has happened for years, now I'm expected, when I get called for jury duty, to put my hand on a Bible and affirm before God to tell the truth. Well, I'm trustworthy. I can promise, I can affirm, I can take an oath to affirm under the law, which is valid. But if that particular judge has in God we trust behind her, and she happens to be evangelical Christian, and I get a Bible in front of me and I say, I prefer not to swear on the Bible, or I prefer to say, I'm not going to say, so help me God, but I will say, I affirm and promise to tell the truth. I'm legally correct, but I can be held in contempt and sent to jail. And then I have to try to get out later and then file a complaint and hope she gets publicly censured. But in these small towns, that just won't happen. So I have to either play by the rules or take my chances, right? I shouldn't be put into that situation. And neither should, if you have a situation where there's two people who are arguing in civil court, one is an evangelical Christian and one is a Muslim. And if it says in God we trust back there and there are Bibles in the courtroom, is it fair to that Muslim person? Is justice really blind in that moment? No matter who's right or wrong, does that Muslim think he has a fighting chance in that courtroom? It should.
And I hate to agree with you guys. I think we're supposed to disagree more, but and if you do say I won't put my hand on a Bible, does that impugn you with the jury? Does that impugn you in the courtroom itself? So I totally see your point there.
Yeah. And we've done a lot of talking about like how other religions would feel. And we're leaving out one group that very often feels that they're being
no religion at all guys, right?
No, homosexuals. I mean, what does it say to them when an evangelical group gets to put their 10 Commandments in the government building? I mean, it's the slippery slope.
Well, and we've got a crazy thing going on here in Fresno right now. And the Tower Theater, which is you guys have been in Fresno before. I don't know if you're aware of the Tower District is our arts and creative area, and where the Gay Pride Parade and the Real Pride Film Festival and all of those things in the Tower District, and the Tower Theater is the anchor of that district. And a church is trying to buy that theater right now, an evangelical church. And so the community is raising up against them and saying, no, you can't have anti-homosexual beliefs in your belief systems and come into this area. So it is and of course that church is saying, no, we love everybody and we're going to be accepting and loving. But in the church system they're in, it's actually written into their mission, their value statement. I can't think of what the word is now, that marriage is between one man and one woman. So you can't be fully accepting of somebody that if that's a part of the tenets of your belief system. And yeah, I think that community feels like it's a danger to them.
That is private property, and the church wants to move in, and the community saying you can't because of the neighborhood. That's an interesting case. I wonder.
It is.
So based on where that stands right now, I would have to know more about it. I would probably be on the side of the church in that situation. If they want to buy it and they can buy it, they should be allowed to buy it. I think preventing someone from buying something because you don't like their views, I think is a problem. But I would need to know more about the situation.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to make a statement for sure, but right now I'm going, why would they not be allowed?
Yeah.
Like, I can understand not liking it. I can understand protesting it.
Yeah.
I can understand being extra loud during the parade when you go in front of that building. I understand, doing a lot to demonstrate and protest you don't like it, but actually stopping them from doing it.
Yeah.
I don't know why that would.
Yeah, it's like
I don't know how that would stand.
It's a consistency thing. We fought for the right for what was called the World Trade Center mosque that
Right.
Fox News crowd was so against. If we'd fight for that, obviously, I think I would probably, again, not knowing enough information, fight for the right of the church to put their church there as well.
Well, see my Christian friends, look at these guys standing up for the church, and me as a evangelical leader. I'm sort of saying, church, one of our rules is love your neighbor. And if your neighbors don't want you there, maybe that's not the best way to love them. And
no, I think it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Let me be clear, but I don't know how. I don't think they should be stopped. I mean, I think it's a bad idea to make your kids hold hands if they're arguing with one another. You know, it's terrible. My mom used to make us do that. Me and my sister, when we would argue, she'd make us hold hands for like hours. And we hated each other. We just resented each other. And I don't have a problem with my sister, but we hardly talk today, and I think that may have had something to do with it. I think it's terrible parenting. I would argue with my mom and say, that's bad. You made us resent each other. Would I make that illegal? Would I want to classify making your kids hold hands as child abuse? No, I think it's a terrible idea, but I'm not in favor of legislating that. And by the way, that's a lot of the atheist position on abortion. A lot of atheists would go, I would never have an abortion, but I don't want to legislate my views onto someone else. And again, it comes down to fairness. That's what humanism really is.
Let me step back from those topical discussions for a moment. And Michael, let's start with you. What was the transition for you from growing up Catholic to having the belief system that you have today? What was that journey like for you?
Well, did I even ever ask you that on the show?
I don't think you have.
I don't think I've ever interviewed. This is interesting. This is a breaking news for me.
You guys are learning about each other.
Yeah. And like most people, it was a slow one. It was a very slow one. I remember thinking of myself as very Catholic. Like, I'm very Catholic.
And conservative.
And conservative. I was in the Young Republicans, and I campaigned for Republicans.
Did you have the hair then when you're in the Young Republicans?
What's that?
Did you have the hair when you were in the Young Republicans?
No, not so much. But I was into punk rock and skateboards and in the Young Republicans nonetheless. I was alt-right way before it was cool to be alt-right, man.
You even met Yakov Smirnoff at a Republican event.
Yeah. And then we interviewed Yakov Smirnoff 20 years later.
Yeah. We had him in studio, and Michael was like, we got to recreate this photo. He's like, and he showed him, he was like, I got a photo with you. Let's do it again. So Yakov set aside, and they recreated the photo 20 years later.
Oh, that's classic.
But my story is pretty, it was a slow one. But it wasn't even doubt. It was a doubt about Catholicism. And it's so funny because when I first got into Monty Python, when I was like 14 years old, my dad was like, I don't want you watching that crap. And it was Monty Python's The Meaning of Life. And there's that scene in church where the priest goes, oh, Lord, You are so great. We're all really impressed with you down here. I sure can, and they're just kissing God's ass. And I'm laughing at the movie. I think it's so funny. I went to church that Sunday and I went, oh my God, that is exactly what we're doing. That is exactly what we're doing. And I walked out of church that day and I said, okay, I'm not that Catholic, but I'm Christian. I still believe in Jesus. I believe in God. I believe in all of that. And it was 23 years of age. I was attending Berklee College of Music in Boston, and I literally looked at the ceiling of my apartment and went, "You're not up there, are you?" And that was the last thing I ever said to God. I addressed him that one last time to just say, "You're not there. You're not actually there, are you?" And I've kind of been an atheist ever since. And then, of course, when guys like David C. Smalley and Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins came around, I read all the books and I became very involved, and I thought it was very exciting. And it's a movement, But it was actually Monty Python that was the first little doubt.
And not even like Life of Brian that did it. Wow, that's amazing.
I know.
That's crazy. How about you, David?
First of all, I love being in that company with that. And I forget, because we've worked together for almost 2 years now. I forget that you were a listener of the show before you started. Like, that's crazy to me. Just real quick, tell that story of how, like, I moved to LA, started doing comedy.
Right.
And I had a guy that was helping me book comics on the show because I didn't know anybody in LA.
Right. And the guy said he would put me on a show, and then I just never heard from him again. And then just one day I got tagged in a post saying that I was on this show with David C. Smalley. And I looked at it and it was David. And I didn't know he was a comic at all. And I said, there's been some terrible, this will be exciting. I would love to do. What do they need from me? A speech?
He thought I was coming to the comedy store to do like an atheist talk or something. He's like, I don't know what they want me to do here. This is weird.
Yeah. And then I reached out to him and he was like, no, this is a comedy show. We want you to do a comedy set. And I was like, great. And we actually have been friends ever since.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Yeah.
By the way, didn't you guys tell me you did DeChico's in Clovis once?
We did.
We try not to tell anybody else that, but yeah, we told you in confidence. And
I think we did 3 nights at DeChico's.
Yeah. 3 nights.
The calzone is worth it, though. Let me tell you.
3 nights, total crowd, 11 people.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
3 nights.
They were small. They were small audiences, but they're small places. I mean,
we had a great time. Actually,
we actually did. It was some of the best shows we've done. They're really fun. And
we'll have to get you back again sometime.
Shout out to the Fresno crowd.
Shout out to Clovis. We know that's a word.
Yeah. Now that they know you're atheist, you'll never be invited back. Not to Clovis, at least.
I believe it.
So, David, what was your journey out of Christianity?
Mine was one of skepticism across the board on a lot of stuff. Like, from the age of like 5 or 6, I remember thinking, there's only bad things in the world because there's a devil, and the devil has demons. And they're probably only mean because they're raised to be mean. I was 4 or 5, honestly. I was a tiny, tiny child. And I remember thinking, what we need to do to solve all the problems is to go gather up the baby demons and raise them to be good people. And then they won't want to do anything bad anymore. And so we just need to love them and show them how to be nice. And I was like, well, my mom's never going to go for that. She's never going to want demons in the house. I was like, but if they're cute, she might let me bring them inside. And so I went into the living room.
How old were you when you were doing this?
About 4 or 5.
Oh my gosh. What a deep thinker at an early age. Wow.
I went in there and I said to my mom, do you think baby demons are cute? And she took me to the bathroom and washed my mouth out with soap. Like, literally put a bar of soap in my mouth over the bathtub. And she, to this day, denies doing that, but it is burned into my memory. It was the most disgusting thing, like an actual bar of dial, just like blah, 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 over the bathtub. It was awful. And a lot of Christians hear that and go, oh, I know why you're an atheist now. You're like, screw this whole God thing. No, actually, I was just like, I'm never telling my mom that stuff again about my plans to solve world, to have world peace. But I was a believer well into my teen years. I was saved after what they call the 5th quarter. So fourth quarter football game, people were saying, "Oh, come on down if you've ever sinned," and yada, yada. I believed it. I walked down. I confessed my sins before man. I went to Bible camp. I did Bible study. I was door knocking, winning souls for my church. I was a part of the ministry. I was a part of the music ministry. Michael and I are both musicians. I was a drummer. He's a guitar player. And I was a drummer for several churches. I was wanting to be a worship leader and a pastor. And so I was door knocking one time, and I remember this lady slamming the door. I said, "I'd like to talk to you about our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ." And she said, "Honey, you need Jesus," and slammed the door in my face.
Oh.
And I'm standing there looking at this door thinking, what if she has Jesus on the other side of that door, and I'm talking her out of Jesus into a version of Jesus that I've been taught about that's not real? What if I could be hurting people? And I didn't like that I had been given the jersey and pushed out on the field and knew none of the plays. I had no idea what I was talking about, yet I'm knocking on the door like I'm selling a product I don't understand. So that lack of knowledge bothered me, because everything else in my life I was super skeptical of. My mom and sister nicknamed me Encyclopedia Boy because I would always grab the encyclopedias off the shelf to try to solve arguments about how far the distance from the sun to the earth is. And so they would attack me, yell at me. They would be fighting. I would try to solve the problem and go, "Guys, there's an answer here. You don't have to argue about how far it is. We can look it up." And they'd, "Oh, Encyclopedia Boy's getting his stupid books." And so I was like, all right, fine, but I looked at it with everything. I questioned Santa Claus. I questioned the Easter Bunny. I would stand outside, look at the window right by the back patio and stare at the picnic table, swearing up and down, I'm going to catch that damn Easter Bunny. You're not going to just hop around past me. I was always looking for truth. And I realized I never applied that skepticism universally to my Christian belief. And so when that woman said, "You need Jesus," I was like, what if she's right? I could be wrong. And first thinking I could have the wrong version of Jesus made me go, I should read that Bible that I've been telling people to go find Jesus in. And I sat down at 16 years old and began reading the entire Bible. And I read it cover to cover. A few years passed, a lot of conversations with theology professors and Christian friends at work here and there. And I noticed that they had different beliefs, but they all called themselves Christian. And I would go, is Jesus the Son of God, or is Jesus God incarnate? And a Christian friend would explain to me using Bible verses that Jesus is separate from God and is the Son of God, but is a completely separate entity. And then I would go back to my church and be bragging to my pastor, who's a Baptist. And I go, "Yeah, I found out that this is," then he'd go, "No, that's heresy, son. Let me come talk to you." And he would flip to a whole different set of verses, proving to me, in fact, that Jesus and God are one and the same. And I started losing trust in the Bible to tell me the truth. I realized it was very up to interpretation. And, I wrote a book about it in 2010. It's called Baptized Atheist. It's on Audible. I recommend the audio version, not just because I make more money on it, but because it's actually updated. It was 2 years later, and I made some changes and some updates. So the audio version has more up-to-date information on it. And at the end of the journey, my goal was to get closer to God because I wanted to help solve these problems. And I got so close, I saw that there wasn't one. And then I started wondering why people who were pastors and preachers and seminary students knew just as much as I knew, yet still believed it and considered the book trustworthy. And I found that to be fascinating, which I believe launched me into starting my blog to go, how can a Christian know all the things I know and read all the words that I've read and hear the things about slavery and how women should remain silent and all these terrible verses and the way God treats humanity, yet still worship him? Even according to Christian morals, God does not appear to be a very moral being. How can they justify it? They wouldn't justify it if it was a person. They wouldn't vote for a president that did that, but they worship a God that does that. And they're excited about it. And they're looking forward to dying to go bend at the knee of this God who watched all these terrible things and didn't do it. So I had the problem of evil swirling around. And I got so close, I saw that there wasn't one. And that kind of launched my whole career into this. And now we're
here you are
18, 20 years into this total. Yeah. Just 11 years alone, just on the podcast. But
so it's interesting that because I'm in the stuff that I do now, I run in a lot of people are on that journey of, gosh, I don't believe a lot of things that I used to believe. And even I'm on that journey for sure with you. But you guys have landed at a place where you're talking with people who crystals. And so you've kind of landed at a place where nothing supernatural is in your belief grid. Is that true? Do you now sort of reject any supernatural belief systems?
My view is that something may be possible, but I have yet to see sufficient evidence to warrant my belief. So to me, the intellectually honest position is to say, I'm open to it. It would be cool if it did happen somehow, but I have yet to see sufficient evidence. So I'm a non-believer until I find sufficient evidence. I don't know your view on that.
What do you think, Michael?
I agree with everything he just said, but I also would go one step further to say that there cannot be any such thing as supernatural by definition. If we found out there were ghosts, there would be a scientific explanation for it. We don't have it yet, but I bet you I believe that from what I understand about the natural world, that anything we discover, we can find a natural explanation for. So whatever it is you think is supernatural is natural. And the term supernatural itself means more than natural, which is impossible. It's an oxymoron as far as I'm concerned.
Well, it's a fascinating viewpoint for sure. So does it take a modicum of faith to believe that we can scientifically prove everything supernatural? Is that in and of itself an oxymoronic
any evidence for anything that you would call supernatural, other than perhaps the rise of Donald Trump?
God put him in there, man. That's all I'm telling you.
But that said, so yeah, I mean, I don't believe any of the supernatural claims I've ever come across. But if for some crazy reason we came across something that people believed was supernatural, from my understanding of the natural world, we would be able to find. Let's put it this way. Every mystery that we've ever solved turned out to be not magic. And that's not my line. I don't remember who said that. And so with a track record like that, 100% of the time, every mystery that we were like, must be supernatural, and then we figured out what really was never magic. It was never supernatural. It was some element of the natural world. So with 100% track record, I'm willing to bet that that's probably the way it's going to continue to go.
Why do you think humanity gravitates towards a god of some sort or a religion of some sort so much if there is no validity in it? Do you have a thought on that?
Evolution. I think so. When you see a fawn fall out of its mother, it naturally gravitates to a larger version of itself for safety, for comfort, for food, for warmth, for everything. It's a survival tactic to go to something larger than yourself for protection. When there's a 2-year-old stumbling around a house and a loud thunderclap happens outside, that 2-year-old runs to mom or dad, whoever's closer. It doesn't have to be taught, hey, when you hear these loud noises, come see me. There's a natural instinct to gravitate toward a larger version of you in order to gain safety and comfort. And we've reached a point on an evolutionary scale where we have the technology and the science and the wherewithal to consider the fact that we just might be alone, or we might not have any guidance. There may not be a giant version of ourselves. And so, you hear Christians say that God created man in his own image, and we think that's just the opposite. I think that humans had a really hard time wrapping their head around not having something big like themselves to run to. And so they created God in their image. And I think it probably started, and a lot of anthropologists agree with this from what I've read, probably started with early humans having dreams, visiting a world that is very strange, from past loved ones that you may have killed in your tribe, or that you fought your father for dominance and won. And then he comes to you in your dream saying things like, son, why did you kill me? That can be a jarring thing to wake up from as an early human being, not quite understanding cognition or the dream state or whatever. And so there starts to be this idea that there is a spiritual realm where we can interact that is not this place. It's our dream world, but when you're an early human, you don't really understand that. And then you see electricity flying across the sky, and thunder, and volcanoes exploding, and crops coming out of the ground as if something's offering you food. Without understanding agriculture and climate change and meteorology, it makes total sense why that combined with the evolutionary development of the human mind and the desire to be next to something, a bigger version of yourself for protection, makes perfect sense why gods would have been created throughout time.
Anything you want to add to that, Michael?
I mean, that was a pretty solid explanation.
Thank you.
I think the pattern-seeking mind has something to do with it too. You know, I mean, you know, the crop failed this year, and it just happens to be the year that we were doing this behavior, and then you switch that behavior, and then the yield comes in the following year. And the pattern-seeking mind is an evolutionary advantage. It's why we are here today, is because we were able to say, the herds migrate this time every year, and to see the seasons and to see things like that. But because of the fact that it's such a powerful sense in the human mind, we get a lot of false positives, and I think religion and the idea of a God is just a result of a false positive in the pattern-seeking mind that we have.
Have you heard of the pigeon experiment or the dove experiment that Dawkins writes about?
I have, yes.
So there's basically what he was just saying is they had this thing where there were this box of, I think it was pigeons, or I think they may have just said birds. I don't remember exactly. For some reason, I have it in my head that they were pigeons. But food would be introduced into this box at random times. And there were all sorts of little things they could do. They could bang their head against a bell. They could tap on something. They could scratch things. And they would do it at random times. And they noticed that whenever they would introduce food at a random time, whatever the birds were doing at the time when the food came, when they got hungry, they would go back to those behaviors to try to do it again as if it's some sort of ritual that works. And you're talking about birds, right? So the more advanced you get, the more you start to recognize those patterns. And I think you're spot on. I think that's a great answer too. So yeah, if birds can do it, I know for sure humans do it. And that's how we got prayer.
Yeah. But also, by the way, I mean, come on, volcanoes, earthquakes, lightning. Wasn't a bad guess. I'm not down on early humans. I mean,
right.
It was.
I would defend their right to be that wrong, because if I saw clouds moving through the sky above me and didn't understand what was happening, that's a pretty magical thing to experience as an early human.
And that's actually really interesting. And I have never thought of this before, but you just mentioned clouds. We, as again, it's an evolutionary advantage that we are trained to see faces, because a face to early human was a threat. If you're out with your hunting party and you see a face in the brush, that's probably an enemy tribe, and we're trained to see those faces. So again, we get false positives, which is why we see faces everywhere, because we're trained to see a face because it's a threat. Seeing faces in the cloud, I mean, in the clouds, it's suddenly there's a face up there, that's where thunder and rain and all these things come from.
And volcano fire comes from the ground and explodes up. It's very violent under there, and that looks very peaceful. I mean,
that's interesting. So let's finish with the concept of goodness, and certainly I would tell you guys that. And again, I think I admitted on the show with you guys the other day, I understand my religion is cultural and from my upbringing, but as I walked away from it in my life and walked back toward it, it did have an impact of goodness on my life. In a lot of ways, I feel like my spiritual beliefs spur me to be a better person than I was when I was going through what I call my pagan years. But the concept of goodness is one that people use to make an argument for a God being or something that drives us to be good to one another beyond, in a self-sacrificing way. You guys, I assume, would say, I mean, how does the human condition account for goodness that is self-sacrificial when maybe animals would be a little more instinctually self-preserving?
Well, we are animals. And if you look into what's called kin selection and you study certain types of animals, there are lots of animals who sacrifice themselves to help others. There's a YouTube video of a dog running out into traffic to save another dog and grabs him by his leash and pulls him out. He knows it's dangerous. He sees the dog is hurt, but he runs into danger and saves the dog. What is that? Is that Christian morality? Right? Is that the 10 Commandments? Why? I
believe the dog got saved before that. Yes.
Of course he has to, because all dogs go to heaven. So there's no point.
Right. If my dog isn't in heaven, I'm not going to go. Right.
There you go. So, I think that once again, my answer for why God is so strong, that evolutionary drive. Evolution drives everything. It drives sex. It drives hunger. It drives success. It drives all of these things. Even lipstick. Why do women wear lipstick? Why do we like blush? Why do we like fingernails? All of these things have its roots in some sort of evolutionary reason. The whole hourglass shape, women having wide hips, being attractive to men. It's about childbearing. There are these things that go way deep into our roots. And I think compassion is one of those things. If we had the baby and just threw it in the dirt and it was crying and it needed food and we didn't care or didn't have the ability to care, if there was no dopamine release whenever we did something positive, we wouldn't have made it to this point to have a Zoom conversation with a pastor. We wouldn't exist. So we had to continue feeding ourselves. We also know that it's better to live and work in societies. We are safer in societies. It's safer for us to be together than for me to be alone. Chimpanzees have figured this out. If a chimpanzee steals food, they are kicked out of the troop. Well, now they have to go live on their own, right? So they don't have the safety of other people watching out. They don't have the ability to choose mates anymore. They don't get to pass their DNA along. They're on their own and they have to fight for themselves. And the survival rate of a chimp on its own is not very high. So I think we've evolved to understand that guilt feeling you get is because you're not behaving in a way that society expects, and you know it. It's not because God has told you. It's because you know that if anyone finds out what you're doing, you know this is not up to par with how you're expected to behave if we're all going to share this society. And so those things drive that good behavior. And I could get in deeper, but I would like people to look into, say, prairie dogs. There's a couple of lookouts, right? They're up on their hind legs. They're looking around. When they see a bird of prey, they could easily just run in the hole, but they yelp out, making themselves a target to save 11 of their cousins or brothers and sisters. Well, that's better for more DNA to be passed down. If 11 get saved and the one gets eaten, it's better for the tribe. So why would a seemingly amoral mammal perform these sorts of benevolent acts, if you will, to save other people? We know that in studying chimps, studying gorillas, those who have that gene and are more likely to do more for others, they live longer. They do better in life. And so evolution has rewarded kind behavior and punished negative behavior, and we've learned that over time.
And I would go so far as to say, when you talk about goodness, what goodness were you talking about? Christian goodness? You say that, so then why have Christians historically gotten it so wrong? Obviously, morals are relative to the age.
That's definitely the weak point in my argument there, for sure.
I know. And we could go through the list from slavery, homophobia, burning witches, crusades, you name it. The Christian church and Christians in general have gotten it so very wrong. Now you say you're a moral person right now and you're a good person. And I challenge you to have a thought experiment for yourself. Imagine a Christian or any person 100 years from now looking back to the fact that you support factory farming and the slaughter of animals and the fact
Here he
that
goes
you eat
with his
hamburgers.
vegan.
Sorry, but it's just
He's so religious. You're so religious. What is your deal?
Religious. 100 years, I could show you a video of a girl playing.
You're probably right, but shut
cow.
up. You're probably right.
100 years from now, your goodness will not be the goodness that people ascribe to in that age.
For eating a hamburger, they won't think I was a good person.
I challenge. I
think he's onto something.
If you look at least factory farming and the treatment of these animals, people will say, just like you look back and go, how could you have owned slaves, or how could you have lived in a society that permitted slavery? I don't understand it. I think somebody will look back and look at factory farming. You live in Fresno, which I guess you wouldn't go up the 5, but everyone knows as you go up the 5 to get to San Francisco, you drive past that giant, I'll use the joke term everyone uses, Cowschwitz. You drive by it. How you could drive by that and not go, how could you do that?
I do not endorse that term.
I do not either. The views expressed in this program do not necessarily Paul Swear or David C. Smalley. There you go.
If the NSA is listening right now, that was Michael that said that.
Yeah. I didn't come up with it. Everyone calls it that. But at any rate, I mean, how could you endorse factory farming?
Yeah.
And I'm not asking you to answer that right now.
Right.
But 100 years from now, people will wonder, how in the world could you have been okay with that? How could you have been okay with just sucking every living thing out of the ocean, killing the oceans? All the fish populations are in collapse. How could you have thought that was okay? This is the person in the future speaking, not me.
That they'll say, I would have been against that if I were there. Just like we look back, I would have been against slavery, and
right.
And so, yeah, I can see that. I want to say one more thing to kind of turn this on its head, though. Every Christian I talk to says that they have objective morality, and that my morality must just be all subjective. I might disagree with Michael a little bit on morality. I think there are a few handful of things that are objectively morally true, and we could get into that on the show or whatever. Because depending on how much information you provide, it allows me to provide a better explanation for that. It comes down to John Rawls' veil of ignorance, and it gets a little blurry and confusing, so I won't muddy up this time with a moral discussion. But there are many atheists who accept some form of objective morality on a few occasions. But Christians will claim that they have objective morality and the atheist can't. But I say the Christian cannot have objective morality. The atheist could just say, based on the facts of reality, torturing a baby for your own enjoyment definitely causes harm to the baby. And that's a fact of reality, no religion required. But the Christian can't say something is morally wrong objectively, because if God decides to do that thing by definition becomes good. So your morality, if you are a believer, may seem objective to you, but it is entirely subjective up to the whims of your God in that moment. You could say thou shalt not kill, but when God orders Saul to go wipe out the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15:3, you now have to argue with me on my show that God had a good reason for that. We're just too stupid to understand why stomping on a baby's forehead is a good thing. And so now my morality gets called into question because I can't know the future and know why God would do that for good. Therefore, I must accept it as good because God is good all the time, and all the time God is good. So it's just told to me that he's good. But if God decides, if God gives you a commandment and then later says, I want you to go do that thing, that objectively bad thing he told you to never do is now an objectively good thing that you have to do as a good Christian. So Christians have subjective morality according to God. Atheists tend to run more on the idea of consequentialism. What are the consequences of my actions? Is it going to do more harm than good, right? And you can weigh it based on that. So I don't think Christians could have an objective morality.
It's a compelling argument, and I think a lot of, I mean, you do, I'm certainly reading the Bible a lot differently than I grew up being told what it is, and I think a lot of those stories, and again, you're right, it's a whole nother topic for another show, but I think a lot of our Bible stories were written from a human perspective, and they're like, hey, we did this. Let's say God said to do that. Let's there you go. God said to do that, so it was okay.
Well, also, it makes it a lot harder for people to challenge you. If you wanted to give rules and laws, like when Paul was talking about women, if he just came out on my own and said, I know God disagrees with me on this, but I think women should keep their mouths shut, I don't think that would go over very well, right? But if he says, God told me to tell you that if women have questions, they should go home and ask their husbands. It's shameful for women to speak in the church of Corinth. Well, now, that came from God. Well, what if it didn't? Hey, all scripture is God breathed. By the way, what's that? First, is it Timothy?
1 Timothy 2, I think.
2, okay. Yeah, all scripture.
Yeah, you may know better than me. I
thought it was 3:16. I thought it was something.
Oh, you're right. You're right. I think it is.
Peter's. No, that's the other.
I don't have my Bible all memorized yet.
1 Peter 3:15 is to always be prepared to offer reasons for the hope that you have, but do so with gentleness and respect. That's a different thing. But I love that one too. That's probably my favorite Bible verse, to be honest with you. I use it against Christians all the time when they refuse to come on my show. Always be prepared to offer reasons for the hope that you have, and they'll say, yes, but I shall not cast pearls before swine.
Yeah.
Can I just tell you real quick, and that like so many prophets, for some reason God is very absent-minded, and he gave Joseph Smith the golden plates. And we all know that the original transcription got thrown away, and he had to get new golden plates, and God was mad. And that said, but God, he's a little forgetful, and that's why there had to be revelations throughout Joseph Smith's life. Like, oh, but I forgot to mention this. And in the revelation, and this is true, and this is in Krakauer's book, Under the Banner of Heaven, which is very good, which chronicles the life of Joseph Smith, that when Joseph Smith had the revelation, which he didn't have until he had a lot of followers with attractive daughters, that he should have more than one wife. And God included in the revelation, Mrs. Smith needs to deal with it and keep her mouth shut. God said, it says, I get to have as many wives as I want.
It's in there.
And God said that my wife needs to.
That is actually
Zippity J. Zippenstein about this.
That is
How
actually in Doctrines and Covenants. And I read that verse while I had an active Mormon on the show. And he was like, that's not in there. That's not in there. Then he went to the Mormon website and found it. And he was like, yeah, that's in there. Okay, I got to process this.
All right, good stuff, guys. Well, I've actually gone longer with you than I planned, but that's really great stuff. And I think it's important for Christians to hear some of, mostly what the view is of us from outside of us. And that there is often this statement I hear from Christians that there can't be good outside of having Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. And I think anybody who would listen to you guys tonight would come away and say, all right, those seem like pretty decent guys for guys that are bound for hell. So thank you for being decent guys on this side of eternity.
We're going to make hell really fun. And the Christians who accidentally end up there are going to be glad we're there, because we're going to protect you guys too. Can I do one thing real quick before we go? I would like to I'd like to give Michael a gift. Can I give you something? I have something for you.
All right. Wow.
It's this amazing book. It's called Joseph Comes to Town. And I pulled some strings. I got it signed by the author. It's
a fantastic author, by the way.
In there. Check this out. It's actually, it's signed. There's a personal note just to you. So just for our friendship.
Thank you very much. I'm thanking, I thank you for passing it along, but I think I'm going to thank Paul as well. Thank you, Paul. I very much appreciate it. I look forward to reading it.
I have a copy as well.
You guys are welcome. No pressure.
This is the first time Michael's been here since you were on the show. So this is my first time actually seeing him to give him the book you sent. So thank you.
Thank you for the plug for the book. And you get no pressure to read it, but I just wanted you guys to know I appreciated you inviting me along on your show.
So thank you for having us on this one. This has been a lot of fun. We should do this more often.
Yeah, it has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
And you guys got to learn about each other, so that's fantastic.
That's right.
We have something we can fight about now. That's great.
Yeah, and I came up with that theory about the faces in the clouds. I hadn't thought of that before.
Good stuff.
I'm gonna
you just came up with that on the spot.
I came up with that on the spot.
I am impressed. All right, gentlemen, appreciate you being on. Oh, real quick, tell everybody where they can find you, both of you, on social media, whatever you want to highlight out.
I'm David C. Smalley on everything. Instagram, TikTok, that's my website, davidcsmalley.com. Oh, is this going to air really soon?
It'll air in 2 weeks.
Oh, man. Okay. Well, then never mind. Well, then in that case, go on Amazon or YouTube or wherever you stream stuff and look for Danger Force. It's a Nickelodeon sitcom that I'm on, and specifically on one episode called Twin It to Win It. It's probably called episode 18. But yeah, go buy that. It's like $2.99, $3.99. Go watch it. I get to be a criminal on a Nickelodeon show, so check that out. But yeah, other than that, I'm David C. Smalley on everything.
Yeah, and you're a criminal on this show too,
as well. Yeah, of course.
And you can find me at michaelregiliocomedy.com. That's REGILIO, or on the Twitter machine, Michael Regilio 1.
I hate that.
All right, excellent, guys. Pleasure to talk with you, and we'll do it again.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.